the creeping fear. From the moment Jamie Turner unlocked the door to apartment 315, an inexplicable chill traced the nape of her neck, a whisper of dread that she dismissed as a draft. The apartment, with its pale walls and too quiet ambience, felt oddly unwelcoming for a place meant to be her new beginning in the bustling heart of the city. The initial days slipped by in a flurry of unpacking and settling in. However, as the newness wore off, Jamie couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At night, the shadows cast by the streetlights outside seemed to flicker unnaturally, as if something or someone was moving just beyond the light's reach. She told herself it was just the stress of the move and the loneliness of a new city seeping into her nights. Her first sleepless night came when the tapping started. It was a soft, rhythmic sound coming from the living room wall adjoining the next apartment. Tap, tap, tap. At first, Jamie thought it was just the building settling or perhaps the plumbing acting up. But the tapping continued night after night, always at the same time. 3:07 a.m. Curiosity mixed with fear the night she decided to investigate. She pressed her ear against the wall, the cold plaster sending a shiver down her spine. The tapping seemed to grow louder, more insistent, and then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Jamie backed away, her own breath ragged, her heart pounding against her ribs. The next day she inquired with the building manager, Mr. Donnelly, an elderly man with a weathered face and tired eyes. He informed her that the apartment next to hers had been vacant for months. The news sent a cold knot of fear twisting in her stomach. If no one lived next door, who or what was making the tapping sound? That evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jamie's curiosity overcame her fear. Armed with a flashlight, she decided to explore the supposedly empty apartment. Mr. Donnelly, after some hesitation, agreed to let her in, warning her to be careful. The apartment was a mirror image of her own, yet whereas hers was filled with the comforting clutter of habitation, this one was barren, cold, and draped in shadows that seemed to swallow the weak beam of her flashlight. As she moved through the living room, her footsteps echoed ominously. There was no furniture, no decorations, just empty space and the thick, suffocating blanket of dust. It was in the far corner of the room that she found it, an odd, dark stain on the wooden floor. It was irregular, sprawling, and seemed unnaturally dark against the dull gray of the dust. As she bent closer, the air around her grew colder, the hairs on her arms standing on end. She reached out a tentative hand, her fingers hovering inches above the inky blackness. Suddenly, the room felt as if it were closing in on her, the walls inching closer, the shadows deepening. She snapped her hand back as if burned, the flashlight's beam trembling along with her hands. Then the tapping started again, louder than ever, but this time it was accompanied by a low guttural whisper that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Leave!" it hissed, the word echoing around her like a malevolent chant. Panicked, Jamie fled the apartment, the door slamming shut behind her with a force that echoed down the empty hallway. Back in her own apartment, the air felt heavier, tainted by the darkness she had stirred next door. That night, the tapping returned, but now it was accompanied by whispers, the words unintelligible, a cacophony of voices that filled her dreams with nightmares. In the days that followed, Jamie's life became a waking nightmare. Objects moved on their own, disappearing only to reappear in impossible places. Cold spots appeared randomly, chilling her to the bone. But worst of all were the dreams, vivid, terrifying scenes that played on her deepest fears and insecurities, leaving her to wake screaming in the dark, the echoes of those whispers caressing her mind like a lover's touch. Driven to the brink, Jamie began to research the history of the building, desperate for answers. What she discovered chilled her to her core. The apartment building had been built on the site of an old asylum, its history marked by tragedy and unspeakable horror. Patients had suffered at the hands of a cruel and unscrupulous doctor who, according to local legend, had conducted horrific experiments in the pursuit of immortality. As Jamie delved deeper, she realized that the malevolent presence in her apartment was feeding on her fears, growing stronger with each passing day. It wasn't just the building that was haunted. It was her own mind turning against her anxieties giving shape to the darkness. In the deepest shadows of her apartment, in the quiet moments between dusk and dawn, Jamie knew she had to face the entity, to confront it before it consumed her completely. But how do you fight something that lives within your own mind? How do you kill fear itself? Jamie's resolve hardened as the terror took root. She understood that this entity, this darkness, was not just feeding on her fear. It was an echo of the horrors that had seeped into the very walls of the building. Her battle was not just with her own demons, but with something far older and more sinister. Determined to reclaim her sanity and her life, Jamie sought out the help of a local psychic, Mrs. Green, who was reputed to understand such malevolent forces. Mrs. Green was a small woman with piercing eyes that seemed to look right through Jamie, seeing beyond the facade of normalcy. She agreed to visit the apartment, her presence a mix of calm and unsettling certainty. As they entered apartment 315, the temperature dropped, their breath visible in the air as if the apartment itself was breathing cold dread into the space. Mrs. Green's eyes narrowed as she moved through the rooms, stopping in the center of the living room, right where the tapping had been the loudest. "This place," Mrs. Green murmured, her voice a mix of fear and fascination, "is a nexus of psychic energy, a focal point where the boundaries between worlds are thin." Jamie listened, the weight of each word settling in her like stones. Mrs. Green explained that the entity was likely a manifestation of the tortured souls that had once inhabited the asylum, their pain and fury harnessed by the dark experiments conducted there. It was anchored in this world by their collective suffering, feeding on the living to sustain its presence. "The only way to banish it," Mrs. Green continued, "is to sever its ties to this world. You must confront it, not with fear, but with the strength of your own spirit." That night that they prepared for a confrontation, Mrs. Green brought salt, candles, and various talismans, arranging them in a specific pattern around the apartment. As midnight approached, the air grew thick, the shadows deepening, pulsing with unseen energy. Jamie stood at the heart of the apartment, surrounded by candles flickering in the oppressive darkness. She closed her eyes, recalling every moment of fear, every nightmare, every whisper. She gathered her courage, her will, her desperate desire to be free. As the clock struck midnight, the candles flared, and the temperature plummeted. A figure appeared in the shadows, its form vague and shifting, a maelstrom of dark energy. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the walls themselves seemed to scream in agony. "You cannot defeat me," the entity hissed, its voice a chorus of despair. "I am born of fear, nurtured by suffering. I am eternal." Jamie's heart raced, but she steadied her voice, speaking directly into the darkness. "You are nothing but a parasite," she declared. "These people suffered enough. It's time to let them go. It's time for you to go." The entity roared, a sound so loud and terrifying that the very window shook. But Jamie stood firm, her voice growing stronger. "I am not afraid of you," she shouted, pouring every ounce of her conviction into the words. The candles blazed brighter, and Mrs. Green began chanting, her voice weaving through Jamie's declarations, creating a tapestry of sound and intention. The entity writhed, its form dissipating as if being torn apart by the forces summoned against it. Then, as suddenly as it had escalated, the room fell silent. The candles dimmed to a soft glow, the temperature returning to normal. Jamie opened her eyes, the weight lifting from her shoulders, her heart still pounding, but her spirit unbroken. In the days that followed, the apartment felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. The shadows no longer flickered with malice, and the air no longer held a whisper of dread. Jamie knew that she had faced something unimaginable, something that would haunt the edges of her dreams for years to come. But she had emerged victorious. She realized that fear, while a powerful force, could be conquered not with weapons or anger, but with courage and a refusal to succumb. She had not only freed the tormented souls of the past, but had also reclaimed her future. In the heart of the city, apartment 315 stood silent, a testament to the battle fought within its walls, a battle against darkness, against fear, and for the human spirit.
If you enjoyed this chilling story, let us know by smashing that like button. We upload new spine-tingling tales every week, so subscribe to our channel and hit that notification button so you never miss an episode. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback shapes our future uploads. Stay spooky, and we'll see you in the next video.